Hello and welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Ladi Williams. Coming up on the show today, South Africa begins vaccine rollout after Johnson & Johnson shots arrive. And Kenya to get $2.4 billion IMF loan in COVID budget relief. And Egypt's president says the country needs $1 trillion to keep pace with population growth. Begin with midweek's show with Mark with numbers, which were mostly negative in Africa. Only the GSC rose marginally by 0.04% at intraday. On the flip side, Nigeria's main index sustained the bearish run, falling 0.63%. Elsewhere, the EGX30 declined the most by 0.73%, and Kenya closed a negative on Tuesday. And markets in the Gulf region were all in the red at intraday. The Qatari index shaved off 1.12%, the largest decline for the day, while Saudi Arabia's index lost 0.19%. In the UAE, Dubai's main index declined 0.61%, while Abu Dhabi index fell 0.49%. And European stocks retreated slightly this morning as investors monitored rising bond yields and the outlook for inflation. Let's cross over to Frankfurt's stock exchange now, where Chelsea is standing by to bring us up to speed with major developments in Europe. Thank you for joining us, Chelsea. So the creator of the popular game Fortnite has filed a complaint against Apple with the European Commission. Can you tell us more?
So this complaint has been filed by Epic Games, which, as you mentioned, is the creator of this ultra-popular game, Fortnite. And what they're alleging is that Apple is really abusing its power in terms of the conditions that it sets in place for any app developer that wants to be in the Apple App Store. So this has been a dispute between Apple and Epic Games for several months now. And what ended up happening in the U.S. was that Epic Games tried to get around some of these conditions that they say are abusive by putting in place their own payment system. Apple notoriously charges every app in its store 30% of the money they bring in as the payment to be in the App Store. Fortnite and the Fortnite creator Epic Games had tried to get around that by putting in place their own payment system, and this has really sparked off a back and forth war of different lawsuits between the two companies. But now Epic Games is coming to Europe and asking the EU to step in. And there's reason to think that perhaps Epic Games will have their case falling on friendlier ears. The EU has already been investigating Apple for potentially abusing its power in terms of the conditions that it sets for people and for app developers in the App Store. This was brought to them by Spotify initially. So there is already a case potentially against Apple in the pipeline here in Europe.
And Germany's Adidas has announced that it plans to sell its Reebok brand. What led to this decision?
Adidas bought Reebok back in 2006, and they've really struggled to turn the brand around ever since. They've poured a lot of money and a lot of time into reforming the brand, into all sorts of different initiatives to try and get Reebok really performing well again, and it just hasn't happened. So after really putting in a lot of time and a lot of effort into turning Reebok around, they are ready to really cut ties because they think that Reebok is really dragging them down, and Adidas really wants to be competing on the same level as Nike right now. Adidas is the second biggest athletic retailer in the world. Nike is number one, but Adidas has not been doing quite as well as Nike. So they do hope that they will be able to shed some of this dead weight that Reebok has been posing and really turn their business up a notch. And there do seem to be some interested buyers in Reebok already. Shaquille O'Neal, the famous basketball player for one, is a potentially interested bidder, we've seen reported.
Interesting. And the EU's top court ruled this morning on whether support offered to European airlines to get them through the pandemic is allowed. What did the courts decide?
The court has sided with, for now, the European airlines. This was a case that was brought by Ryanair, the budget carrier based in Ireland, and they had alleged that the bailouts that we've seen European governments giving to airlines like Lufthansa here in Germany or Air France KLM was a violation of EU state aid laws. Ryanair has been very vocal about the fact that they think these bailouts given to European airlines is going to distort the market and make it really hard for them to compete in this market. The EU court is saying that they don't agree, that they do think that at least two of these programs in France and Sweden are legal. So we still have about 14 different cases that Ryanair has filed with the EU's top court. This will deal with things like the Lufthansa bailout here in Germany that the EU court still needs to rule on. But it's definitely a good sign for EU airlines that this very crucial court does think that those bailouts for now are legal.
All right, Chelsea, thanks for the update. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And the UK inflation has risen again. The consumer price index rose to an annual rate of 0.7% in January, up from 0.6% in December. And that's a little higher than economists had expected. Let's hear more now from Juliana. Thank you for joining us, Juliana. Earlier, you spoke about inflation with Chimmy in the morning. How are the markets reading the figures at intraday?
Yeah, good afternoon, Laddie. Well, the FTSE started on Wednesday morning how it ended on Tuesday, firmly in the red, and at intraday it's still very much in the red, and that's really because of the inflation blues. The inflation came in at 0.7%, as you said. This is up from 0.6% in December. Analysts had expected it to be flat or even dip, and that's because typically in January we are used to January sales, and I'm telling you, if we weren't in a lockdown, that's what most people would have been doing in January. We didn't have the rush, of course, on the high street, but people were still spending online. According to the Office for National Statistics, one of the main lifters of the inflation rate this time is the increase in household goods and the increase in food prices. So that has hit the FTSE at intraday, but there are some risers. There is a strong surge in the demand and the price of oil, which means Royal Dutch Shell and BP are both up by about 1.85 and 1.97%. So the FTSE All Share is down 0.37%. The FTSE 100 is down by 0.31%, and the FTSE 250 is down by 0.59%. In the currencies market, the British pound down today against the US dollar by 0.24%, up against the euro, however, by 0.10%, and down on the Japanese yen by 0.30%, Laddie.
And economists are predicting inflation will continue to rise. One of them is Paul Dales, chief UK economist at Capital Economics, and he's predicting that in the UK it could hit 2% by April, which is actually the Bank of England's target. Brexit will definitely have an impact on this, right? For once, no, definitely not Brexit. It's not Brexit. It's really lockdown and the restrictions. I think 2% by April is very unlikely, considering we're at 0.7%. But, you know, this is a pandemic period. Anything can happen. But, of course, the rise of inflation will be linked to the lifting of lockdown restrictions. There is a lot of pent-up demand. I can tell you, I'm one of those consumers ready to go out and spend. And, of course, when you get lots of people wanting to do that, you can imagine that prices are going up, especially now. You know, the cost of a staycation, just a holiday in the south coast of England, is probably cheaper to go for a 7-day holiday in Nigeria. That's just how much the prices are likely to go up. We are expecting to hear finally from Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Monday about the lifting of restrictions. It is going to take some time, but that plan is going to be rolled out. And then, of course, what could potentially drift inflation down is if the restrictions are lifted, then the furlough scheme and all the government support schemes will stop, and that could be an increase in unemployment. So at the moment, we never know. But as you said, the threshold is 2%, and we're still way off that. Well, it looks like it's a day of data releases. UK housing prices also rising at the fastest rate. What are the drivers here?
Yes, you're right. The average house price in December in this country was £252,000. That's an 8.5% increase from the previous month. Of course, this is if you want to live outside of London. If you live in London at the moment, the average price of a house is £495,000. I decided to put that in the Google. That's over 262 million naira. It's really, the same story that we've been discussing over the past couple of months. People have been spending a lot more time at home. They've been looking around at their surroundings. Everybody wants to have a nice bookcase Zoom background. And in this country, people have been doing it by investing in much larger homes. According to the data released today, there has been a 10% increase in the amount of detached properties that are being sold. And of course, the fact that stamp duty was scrapped for the past 6 months. It is likely to come back again. We're expecting to hear from Chancellor Rishi Sunak on the 3rd of March in his spring budget. So some say this is likely to bust, but the boom in the housing market activity is definitely welcomed.
Anyway, I wish we could trade inflation rates, but we'll see how it goes. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Yeah. So stocks in Asia Pacific were mixed today as investors monitored bond yields following a recent rise. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 slid 0.58% on the day to 30,292, while the Topix index shed 0.18% to close at 1,961. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 1.1% to end its trading day at 31,084, while South Korea's Kospi closed 0.93% lower at 3,133. Shares in Australia also declined, with the S&P ASX 200 closing 0.46% lower at 6,885. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan rose 0.39%. Markets in mainland China remain closed for the Lunar New Year holidays. And U.S. stock index futures were lower in early morning trade after the Dow closed at a record high. Futures contracts tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell marginally by 0.01%. S&P futures and Nasdaq 100 futures also traded fractionally lower. The move comes after the Dow closed at a record high during regular trading on Tuesday. The 30 stock average 8th record this year. The index also hit an all-time intraday high, fueled by strengthened shares of Salesforce. The S&P 500, meanwhile, fell 0.06% during a volatile session of trading, while the Nasdaq Composite dipped 0.34%. And bullish oil prices marked a time earlier today as support from supply disruptions in the U.S. South caused by an Arctic blast was offset by expectations that OPEC Plus producers may ease their output curbs after April. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures dipped 3 cents to $60 a barrel, retreating from a 13-month high of $60.95 hit on Tuesday. Brent crude futures gained 0.2% to $63.46 a barrel, adding to 3 days of gains. Oil prices have run up strongly in recent months, and supply disruptions caused by a historic winter storm in Texas, the country's largest oil-producing state, continue to keep prices supported. Both oil futures are dipped in early morning trade due to pressure from a stronger U.S. dollar and a potential output increase from the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and Allies. And gold prices fell in early trade today as their lowest in nearly 2 weeks as the dollar firmed and U.S. Treasury yields rose, while platinum eased further after scaling a more than 6-year high in the previous session. Spot gold was down 0.2% to $1,791 per ounce after hitting its lowest since February the 4th at $1,785 in early trade, while U.S. gold futures slipped 0.6%. To $1,788. Among other precious metals, silver shed 0.1% to $27.20. Platinum eased 0.2% to $1,258, and palladium fell 0.5% to $2,372. Platinum, which is used in automobile catalytic converters to limit exhaust emissions, has rallied about 18% this year on hopes of rising demand. as a result of greener technologies. And we'll take a break now. We'll bring you more stories across the African continent. When we return in a moment, do stay with us. You're watching Business Incorporated. South Africa will begin administering the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine to health workers today following the arrival of a first consignment of the shots. The Chief Executive Officer of South African Medical Research Council says health teams worked overnight to distribute the vaccines to most parts of the country, adding that vaccinations in Cape Town will start by 12 p.m. South African time. South Africa received an unspecified number of the J&J shots on Tuesday night and in talks to procure an additional 20 million doses. South Africa has recorded more than 1.49 million coronavirus cases, the most on the continent. And South Africans are in for a hefty rise in the price of electricity as the National Energy Regulator of South Africa has agreed to Eskom's increasing its tariff by over 15% for the 2021-2022 financial year. The agreement between NERSA and Eskom came after the power utility won a case in the Pretoria High Court in October 2020, which allowed it to push for a higher tariff increase than what NERSA was willing to allow. The increase will see the debt-laden Eskom raise a further 10 billion rand in the allowable revenue. Though the tariff increase is a further blow to cash-strapped South Africans, it's a boost for the troubled power company, which has over 400 billion rand in debt and is owed 31.5 billion rand in overdue debt by several municipalities. And Egypt's President Abdel al-Sisi says that keeping pace with the current population growth rate and improving living conditions for its citizens will cost the state $1 trillion. President al-Sisi adds that the rate of population growth should be proportional with the resources available in Egypt, explaining that this growth negatively affects all sectors. He added that the government is serious about counteracting the challenges the country faces, as it is the role of the government to improve the living conditions of citizens. Overpopulation, it says, is a national security matter, and the security and stability of the state is linked to reducing the population increase. And Kenya will receive a $2.4 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund to support the country's budget to weather the coronavirus economic hardships. The IMF says a deal has been reached by both parties for the 38-month credit facility, whose disbursement will start in the coming weeks. Joining me now to talk about this is George Bordeaux, the CEO at Call Street Research and Analytics in Nairobi. Hello, George. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, great to have you. So Kenya will be receiving a $2.4 billion loan from the IMF, which it applied for in December. Do you have more details on what the loan is for and the terms of the agreement?
Yes, sure. The loan is largely for budgetary support. Government, the pandemic has really impacted government revenues, and government has been trying to look for ways to bridge all the deficit that is running in the current fiscal year. So largely it's going towards budgetary support. The conditions are just your typical, usual IMF conditionalities. They're looking at government bringing down matching spending and revenue. So they're looking at fiscal deficit at regions of below 7%, because this year, next fiscal year, the government is projecting a deficit of about 7.5% of GDP. I'm sure the IMF is looking at a much lower figure than that. And on the other side, the IMF is looking at the government rolling out new tax measures. I think they're very keen on government introducing more ways of taxation. They were very mad last year when the government introduced some form of tax incentives to cushion the households and the general population. So they were asking the government to introduce some more neutral, what they were calling revenue neutral measures, which is basically to counter those tax cuts. So I think they're also looking at taxation going up in the next fiscal year. We're also looking at a more on the governance side. I expect them to apply more pressure, especially on what I call fiscal cliff rate. That is very a big issue on this side. So around those three conditionalities, the major one. I don't see much on the monetary policy side, but I think they're going to say something about monetary policy. But I think monetary policy right now for me it's a bit more subdued, so I don't expect much pressure from the IMF. But on the fiscal side, I expect a lot of pressure for fiscal discipline on the government.
And the government is seriously considering raising the debt ceiling. Are you concerned about this? And where would this new debt ceiling possibly be? Hello, George. Okay, I guess we lost George there. We'll try to get him back later on. Okay, hello, George.
Yes.
Hello, George. So I don't know if you heard my question. Hello?
I'm not sure if I had.
Yeah, did you get my question? Hello? Yeah, so I said that the government is considering raising the debt ceiling. Are you concerned that this new ceiling, what it could possibly be?
So the government, yes, the government is considering raising the debt ceiling.
Yeah.
Remember, there's been over the last 2 years, there've been reforms around that. Initially, the public finance management rules set debt ceiling at 50% at ratio of GDP, 50%. Now, last year, the government came and amended that, rather Parliament amended that, based on the proposal from the National Treasury. They say that now debt ceiling is not going to be a ratio of GDP, it's going to be a nominal figure. And they pegged it at 9 trillion Kenyan shillings last year. Now, current public debt is almost hitting 9 trillion shillings, and they've been wondering what to do. Now, the Treasury has proposed to increase the ceiling to a nominal figure of 12 trillion Kenyan shillings. That is an additional 3 trillion on top of that. That is the figure that is flying around. We don't know where it's going to be, but the figure flying around is now 12 trillion. And obviously, this is at 12 trillion, that's going to be very high. And I'm not sure how much the economy can take when it comes to public debt side. And also remember that the public debt now is about 51% foreign currency denominated, which is now putting a lot of pressure. And now, if they add on to this, the additional borrowing that they're planning this year, public debt, the foreign currency portion of the public debt probably rise to about 55%. And that has a lot of significant impact, especially if the economy cannot generate enough foreign currency to pay those debts. And we likely to see a lot of pressure on the local currency, especially at the time and at the point when the repayments are coming due. So.
All right, George. All right, George Bodo. Thank you so much. George Bodo is the CEO of Call Street Research and Analytics. Thank you for your time. I'm afraid that's all we can take on Business Incorporated for this midweek. Thank you for watching. I'm Ladi Williams. Bye for now.